Hello and welcome. My name is Lech. I'm a product manager here at Canonical, and welcome to this webinar. We'll be discussing some of the ideas for our Ubuntu 20.04 users. So 20.04 is the release that we launched almost 5 years ago, and we'll be focusing on both, personal users, developers, but also the enterprise approach. So anything that will be helpful for sysadmins and CISOs who care about, security and compliance of their very stable environments. And I'm not here by myself today. I brought a friend who will help me to cover some of these aspects. Christian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Christian Erhardt, director of the Ubuntu server team, and part of all these releases. Today we talk about Ubuntu Focal coming out in 2020. I was there already like 4 or 5 years, and I'm still here, happy to bring out regular releases. So yeah, I like it.
That's great. I also was here. Actually, I think I just started working for Canonical when we launched 20.04. So it was the very first LTS release that I had pleasure in launching. And I remember, learning everything I need to learn about, what it takes to launch Ubuntu LTS behind the scenes. Because, as a user, I used to see it, just being ready on the day, but I never seen what's happening behind the closed doors. So it was kind of interesting to see, and the closed door are not so closed as well, right? So you can, if you want to know what is happening, it's kind of open, so you can actually see what's happening before we launch the release. But it was, I remember, very exciting to see it, being born, and also to contribute to things like press release and the very first webinar when we launched.
Yeah, absolutely. Those regular releases, you can participate, but you can just consume. It's really up to you, whatever is your choice. I mean, I've been in Ubuntu as a user more than a decade before I joined. And yeah, just like you, I was seeing them come out and appreciated it. And then at some point started to look a bit deeper, but only when I joined realized oh yeah, that's all the extra qualification here, test there, interaction there. And it makes sense. All of it is a necessity to bring out something reliable. And I mean, in fact, we're currently working on 25.04 because of the pattern, right? The next release is in April. So everybody here is the usual, how do we get stuff done? So yeah, things towards the next blocky release is what we go for. And I mean, you often have two kind of users. You have those migrating to the newest all the time, and I'm happy about those. They help us to see how the new works. But you also have to admit, I mean, I come from very enterprisey, even mainframey background. It's like you don't move unless you have to. So migrations to the new have so much opportunity, exploit new hardware, get stuff done, finally get some fixes which can't be backported for reasons. But on the other hand, and I was part of that, can't or won't move. So the release cadence really is an interesting thing that I hope people still admire, because they did 20 years ago, kind of, when things started. And we established that, and it's kind of helpful to users to be able to plan ahead. And you were part of the solution to plan ahead a bit longer, which I appreciate now, looking back those 5 years that you're around.
That's very true. I think it's just fascinating observing how well this machinery works, knowing that we are launching 2 releases every year, which means that over 20 years, we probably launched more than 40 releases to date. So I remember one of the sprints that we recently joined, there was like this big kind of board with all the animals and all the releases listed. I haven't counted them, but it looked like really a lot. So it really feels like something that we've just practiced over time and really got to be really, really good and well-oiled machine to kind of release them on time and make sure that everything works properly.
I mean, part of why we want to meet is what we can do to make the Focal getting to the end of the standard support, because that's what the 5 years mean, to not be that much of a hard stop for people around. Because as I mentioned, some people want to move, and they already have, quite likely, because I see so many friendly reports of, hey, I've tried this, and here's this little thing you didn't think of. And damn it, yes, from all the people moving to new releases regularly right after. But there's a whole bunch that uses the old, and that does not have to be so much of a cliff of it's done now.
Yeah.
In regard to upgrading, the usual upgrade philosophy is at least LTS to LTS. So if you really think of upgrading, you have to be careful. You can take a literal Ubuntu system and upgrade it from Focal 20.04 to Gen 22 And you could upgrade further already to Noble, but you would have to go through those interim upgrades. But to be honest, while you might do so on a laptop, on an experimental system, almost everyone doing it at a professional level would deploy a new Noble and install their workload. Either way, go to the new thing if you can. Yeah. And if you can't, you helped us to establish Pro. So I'm happy about that as an option to go for things. Which, by the way, many of my friends now use. I mentioned that to you. So private use.
We'll jump to Pro in a minute, but I wanted to first unpack some of the popular use cases for our Ubuntu users. I think that it's just coming back to the interim releases versus LTSs. I think it's quite interesting to see or discuss the characteristics of our user base. I think that there is quite a lot of developers or personal users on their workstations that will just jump on the cutting edge next release, even if it's not an LTS. So every 6 months we have a new interim release, and every 6 months you have a chance to jump onto the latest and greatest bleeding edge stack of open source packages that we put together and we release. And then every 2 years, one of these releases, the one in April, will be an LTS that will then make some commitments to. So we will do security updates for main repository, so all the packages in the main repository for 5 years without any subscription needed, but also 10 and also now up to 12 years of security maintenance for both main and universe with Ubuntu Pro subscription. So this is really an LTS commitment for much longer stability, security, and probably also support if you need support from us, that you can also get with Ubuntu Pro plus support offering. But I think it's very different kind of characteristics of the user, someone who wants to be updating every 6 months and getting the newest release, and also someone that wants to just deploy something and just keep it going as is for as long as it takes.
Yeah. It's absolutely two different sets. And maybe, that's putting people too much into categories. There most likely are hundreds of varieties you could identify. But yes, people use and choose to either move or stick to something for quite a while.
I think you're right. It's not necessarily people. I think it's more the use cases. You have a use case for this and you have a use case for that, and it's two different use cases. But it might be, of course, people will have multiple Ubuntu instances. Some of them, workstations. Some of them on their data center. Could be public cloud. Could be private cloud. Could be really anything. Devices.
Yeah, it's cloud as you mentioned, but it's even more. Nowadays the landscape of a Linux system is so much more diverse. You have containers. You might run the majority of stuff in your containers, and you just need a reliable host. That's it. No, it might not even need to change much other than being able to host things. So that's a change. You have elements like snaps, which isolate things, and you can backport more easily because it's just shareable everywhere, and more and more and more things. So Ubuntu is this reliable platform, whatever you need. Do you need to be fast? You get it. Do you need to be stable? You get it as well. And that is a charming thing we are able to provide here. And yeah, you mentioned the 10 and 12 years so easily. I remember the faces when you said 10 and we were like, oh, and then somebody said 12. And, oh. So yeah, it is absolutely a value. It intends to deliver, but it's a value that is worthwhile. And that is why I mentioned that even our friends use it nowadays, home users that are just thought be there. Because when talking about it, we often think about those years because that's the most classic. There's a stop and now there isn't. But also you just, as a little thing said, and universe. So the coverage in universe is, for example, for my friends, because they regularly update. For them, that is very much what is important to them. While today we kind of started to talk about focal. There it's all about soon there's the end of standard support. But it's both. It's covering, I always say space and time. I know you disagree, but that is for me how I define Pro nowadays still.
I think it's very important to mention because you just explained how difficult or shocking that is to make this very strong commitments. We'll do something and we'll maintain the software that is 10 years old for additional 2 years, or we'll now do security updates not just for the operating system itself but also for all the applications and libraries that are part of the universe repository, which is like at least 10 times bigger than the main repository. And I think that our goal at Canonical is to make something that is very easy for our users and kind of difficult to maintain, but we take all of this complexity on our end so that our users can just enjoy using something that is, not only, working well and well integrated with each other, but also something that is just very stable and very secure, so that you don't have to worry about your security of your overall open source stack.
Yes, and what I really liked when we introduced it in this way and form as it is, it's not like you need to do something different. It's not like, yes, you love Ubuntu, now do something else, like Ubuntu Extreme, new install, new something. No, it's just you have your system that you like, get a key, be it like my friends, a private key, fine. There are even free trials if you try it bigger, but just get a key, enable it, and see, oh, right, shameful, I was always using this, and they have security fixes actually out there. That is what almost everyone I talked to realized, yeah, I should have known. I mean, not everybody misses his security checks, but some do, and that's just, the system does not change at all. It just enables a new repository providing further fixes. And
It's good you mentioned that, because I remember when we first launched Ubuntu Pro, people were saying, oh, where do I download Ubuntu Pro from? I need Ubuntu Pro. And it's like, no, it's not a different download. It's the same Ubuntu you have. You just need to get what you call the key, so the token for Ubuntu Pro subscription. You just attach the token to your instance, and off you go. You just upgraded yourself to Ubuntu Pro, and you can benefit from all the extra security updates, all the expanded time to consume security updates on your Ubuntu release, but also some additional services like kernel live patch landscape or compliance. And also, this is the part that we make really easy for our users, which is really hard for us to do, but we kind of eat all of this complexity on our end. And it's very similar to what we do with, desktop versus server, because oftentimes I was in discussion, what's different in server versus desktop? And I was like, there's absolutely no difference. There is just, you get the graphic user interface on top of your Ubuntu, and this is what the desktop is. So can you just cover a little bit more on the ease of use for different use cases when it comes to these different, kind of stakeholders?
I mean, what I think there are three things to talk about. The first two come to this time and space. If you just have a setup that works reliable and you just want it to go on, but know it to be security covered, as you said, enable your machine with a token. And actually that's it, because the default setup is with automatic updates of security updates. It knows that these are security updates. So it would just keep updating it. If you are a person that has a dedicated maintenance schedule, like whatever on the weekend or whatever downturn period, you do that, you know what? It's still just available updates, which you can install or not, up to what you want. For the people which I consider this space, like extension of coverage of universe, that is just formally those who have been community supported, which is great. I have myself uploaded some stuff there, but it's an as good as it gets delivery thing, and this provides this, as you said, like commitment to cover it. But there again, just click on your token and you get it. And the other thing you just mentioned, live patch. I'm a perfect example of a person benefiting from live patch, because my usual rule is I only boot when I travel. So unless the company makes me travel way too often, I will have periods, quite some long periods, of not rebooting at all. And I always feel ashamed if I have to reboot for some bug that I need to fix, but it's rare. So due to that, for me, live patch helps, because I mentioned companies having a regular maintenance schedule. I don't. I reboot as rarely as possible. So for me, having fixes there gives me, I don't know how you would call it, a warm feeling in regard to issues. I don't know. I never had a problem. I never heard of any. I'm sure there have been some, but none got hot enough to go my way. And in that regard, I just appreciate the extra coverage. Would my home setup be the most prone attack target? Maybe not, but that's not how security works, and that's not how coverage works. It's you want to feel rest assured of good provided feature, and those things are there. I would not use, for example, the FIPS that we provide. It's part of Pro, but that's for me,
it's for a very specific use case, right? So if you need FIPS, you need FIPS. If you don't need it, you probably don't want to use it. But it's very different with some of the services that, by the way, we are enabling by default. So when you attach your Pro subscription to your machine, some services will be enabled by default, because we believe that, very big majority, if not all, Ubuntu users will just benefit from them. And this kernel live patch that you just mentioned, this is also ESM apps and ESM infra, so security updates for both main and universe, repositories. So all the packages there should receive security updates as well.
Yes, it just gets more and more specific. The ones we enable by default, as you say, are just, that's full. more or less everyone, and I can't really think of someone not benefiting of Pro, of ESM, apps, infra, and even live patch. The other elements are just, they're more specialized. They're important if you're part of the set that needs these features. Absolutely. They are not even just comfort. They are usually a hard requirement. There's also some real-time offerings in there, right? So all those elements, if you really need it, sure, you get it. But for the majority, they can happily ignore those things to be available and just be happy with what we generally provide.
I think we can explore some of the aspects of how ESM and how kernel live patch works a little later in this webinar. But first, maybe we can jump straight into the topic of the webinar, which is about specifically 2004 LTS going out of standard support quite soon. And we'll have to go through some scenarios that will help you to prepare for that. Of course, upgrading to Ubuntu Pro is one of the scenarios that we'll cover. But first, maybe we'll cover the more typical scenario, which is regarding just migrating or redeploying a newer LTS or really the newest LTS. So some considerations when discussing or considering the either redeployment or in place upgrade for the Ubuntu LTS.
Sure. I mean, I mentioned before, my preference always is redeployment. Both ways work, but for this getting a clean slate and not carrying any of my old bad habits of quick fixes or something, I prefer that. But both paths work. In particular, what I do myself, well, I don't do it so much myself because I've written it, but I recommend everyone reading the release notes of the LTSs. And to be honest, depending on some people like to prepare more, some people like to try more. If you're a preparing person, I would even read the release notes in between, because usually users, Ubuntu can be so many different things. It can be a web server for one, it can be a laptop for another, it can be a massive database with many clusters. And that means that different people are interested on different aspects. If someone says things are now socket activated or systemd service handling is different, a provider of a service might like, oh, let me read this. Let me go even to the detailed changelog that is linked. While a laptop user might say, I don't care. They might way more care about a new feature on the desktop. And due to that, if you're upgrading with do release, you upgrade your current system to the latest level, and then you do release upgrade, which upgrades you to the next LTS. That's what you would do. Or as I mentioned, redeployment. But please do neither without formally checking the release notes, or at least, that sounds aggressive, but it's meant friendly. Don't complain if it would have been written there like, please do not do this because we know that's the reason. And it's all fine. Because
I think the points to consider is also the fact that, when you're migrating from one Ubuntu release to the next, we definitely can carry all of the packages that you got from one Ubuntu release to the next Ubuntu release. There will be a lot of changes in different versions and different libraries, so you will move from one to the other. But also you might have and probably have installed a bunch of different applications from outside of the Ubuntu repositories that will not move along. So you have to consider everything. Ubuntu repositories are kind of broad in terms of the scope. So a lot of open source can be consumed directly from Ubuntu, and we very much encourage that. But some of your applications that you get from outside will definitely know to move along. So I guess this is the main consideration when thinking about redeploying versus upgrading, no?
Yeah, you see me slightly nodding. I know that sometimes people need outside applications. I'm still not a fan of it. If you can stay to a pure open source approach, use things from your archive. But I understand sometimes the solution just, maybe it's not even open, or it's just you have a particular service provider, and so you have to. And yes, depending on the level, you might just say, oh, it needs to work on the new release. Sure. Some people need certain certificates, different industries have certain requirements on that. And yeah, a new release always brings new APIs, new library versions, and that is what the systems need to be able to go for. And for example, a lovely topic that I love is usually the performance topic of new releases, because most of the time, and that's an interesting bit, if you use exactly what you have and use it in the new, people are often under impressed or unimpressed because it's more or less as before or slightly worse. Because the majority of improvements is usually around being able to utilize either new hardware or new architecture. Like you can now isolate CPUs for dedicated workloads. It's not new anymore, but only when you use it, you're suddenly much better than before. Well, on the other hand, yeah, some things just got better, especially things like offload support, various things, a bit of encryption there, a few instructions and processor there. They just make things a little bit better and you don't do anything about it. But what I encourage is also look at what changed over these. We now talk about focal to noble, which is 4 years. What changed over those 4 years? Would it make sense to slightly adapt whatever custom solution you have? Because you started with third-party software of any kind, while Ubuntu tries to optimize and adapt Ubuntu to all the changes. If you just use the old thing as is, you will be more or less as you have been before. If that's your desire, awesome. If you want to utilize some of the new, well, go for it.
I think that's really interesting consideration for data center use cases when you consider, redeploying your whole software stack. Perhaps it's also a good time to consider your hardware as well and take it along with, updating the hardware, when you're redeploying your software stack as well.
And it goes both ways, depending on how procurement works in different companies, or if you use clouds. You either have the hardware, and which means you should make sure you use all that is in there, because it's silly if people bought an accelerator or a particular chip and you're using only half of it. And vice versa, if you kind of are more driven by software, make sure you influence what hardware you get. And the Ubuntu underneath is just there to be able to hardware exploit all of them. I mean, we even, for the people sticking to the older releases for stability, we also have the hardware exploitation kernels for hardware enablement. And that is also because at the hardware abstraction layer, the kernel still is the one ruling thing. I mentioned before a few offload libraries that might also help and do things. The kernel is the biggest hardware get it to work. So yeah,
So I think that every Ubuntu LTS release eventually has two different kernels. So you have the GA kernel, so the kernel that we are originally launched with, and you get the hardware enablement kernel, which is the kernel that you need to, I guess, hop 3 times as we go along to the new interim releases. And then eventually after 2 years, the next LTS GA kernel becomes the current LTS HWE kernel for the remainder of the,
which means you're 2 years.
This really,
Which means you're 2 years newer than before, and that's perfectly fine. And because there's always this trade-off. If you talk to a particular individual using Ubuntu, especially on a professional scale, the usual requirement is, please change absolutely nothing, only stability, please, except this one thing, because I would really like it. But if you're the distributor, it's thousands, 100,000, millions of but for me. And so at the end, you need to choose. And hardware enablement kernel are a nice thing because they are opt-in by the user. They can choose. While bumping every library on the system to the new thing to support the new, you know what? That is a choice of the individual of saying, I go to the new release. I want all of those, because we couldn't do that without breaking the stability and reliability promise to everybody else that loves it for just that.
So I think our advice there is to really talk to your stakeholders, because you might have various stakeholders working with, different pieces of your infrastructure, having different applications and so on. And unless you really consulted all of them, it will not be easy to plan your, upgrade or migration path, decide which versions you need and which versions will work well. And when you plan to go ahead and do the migration project, you have to have probably all the stakeholders' approvals. You have to plan your test environment to make sure that everything worked as planned. And then, there will be some downtime when you're moving from one to the next, I think, no?
Yeah, and also the philosophy there is different. Some like to essentially roll. So they might have, let's say, an example, 20 primary workloads, and they migrate one to the new thing, doing the brunt of what is new on this one. Maybe it's an easy workload or something that has the biggest staffed team or something. And those set of people, they just roll one and then they roll the other and they gradually change over. Has a benefit. On the other hand, you have quite some time of overlap where you essentially deal with 2 base OSs, be it versions or variations or something. So I've also seen some which essentially secretly make sure that everything works on the new, and then, the big lever, you pull the red button and hope it works. It depends on what kind of gain and pain you want. But the good thing is there's no Ubuntu cross-release incompatibility. It's not that you have to do either gradually or a big switch. It's just, whatever you want. I mean, by extending with Pro, you might even say, oh, these things are cattle for me. I redeploy them anyway all the time. Those other things are pets, and I will carefully move them along with manual tests and treatment and QA. And yeah, there you go. And you can use Ubuntu releases and Pro for one or the other or both, depending on your needs. We mentioned containers before. Same.
So I think the point is that the deadline is approaching for end of standard security updates for 2004, the focal release. So it will be end of May, and you'll have to make a decision.
Make the decision now, or if possible, you've done that half a year ago, because transition projects are fine. They are everybody is used to it. At least if you're long in the business than a year or two. But the shorter your runway is, the more likely you're going to do mistakes or run into issues because something else happens.
Yeah.
So
in any case, if you wanted to upgrade to a newer LTS, you probably already have done it, or you're just doing it right now. And if you need more time to decide what you need to do, then Ubuntu Pro subscription will just get you more time. So you have more time to either stay with Ubuntu Pro for another 5 or 7 years, or stay for a couple of months or 1 year, and then really get your project going and upgrade as you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not like you sign up on the first day for the all of the 5 or 7 extra years. You can use it either as a gap close because you couldn't get done, or as full stability all the time. And both are fine. And honestly, I just think if people realized how smooth it works even if somebody just extends by 5 months to get the migration done, if they realize how smooth it works, I'm quite convinced that they might say, honestly, that was easy. And wasn't there also this universe coverage, which I would get on the new release? So I'm fine for whatever percentage of people realize how smooth it can be, and just because it's not important what made you try something the first time. It's the experience you had, and we hope it's good. Otherwise, let us know, and fine, we fix it. But it's this experience that hopefully I see. Oh yeah, actually, it's easy. I can get all the values we mentioned before. For whatever we said, use cases, scenarios, whatever we name it, it provides all the things depending on what you need.
I think the part worth stressing is that the fact that, we will stop providing security updates even for the operating system for 2004 LTS unless you have an Ubuntu Pro subscription. So please don't use 2004 without any security updates, because it's just not very secure. So you have to make decisions. You cannot just continue as is. We mentioned, extra 5 or extra 7 years. So I just want to quickly cover the fact that Ubuntu Pro, although it's normally a paid subscription for enterprises, and Ubuntu Pro with legacy support add-on comes with an additional cost. So it's Ubuntu Pro cost plus 50% for the legacy. So it's even more expensive. I want to stress that this is for enterprise users. This is not for personal users. As you mentioned, you have a lot of friends who are using Ubuntu Pro today, and they're using it with their personal free subscription. Yeah. So
it's worth to mention for transparency, but what I often think people miss, I think the community has picked up that it's for free. And if not yet trying, they usually try it immediately after we actually talk, and then they're, oh, really? Yeah, fine. What I think people often don't realize is that even the enterprises can have a free trial. It's not a pay and suffer. It's try it, see it, and then you will love it.
That's very true. Anyone can get 3 months to figure out how much value there is in the Ubuntu Pro subscription, and this is true for enterprises. And again, personal users, they don't have to pay anything. They just register with their email address. They get a token. They can use this token on up to 5 machines, and this is normally pretty good for your personal use case, or even for a small startup if you're just kicking the tires and start.
We started the discussion talking about the Ubuntu community and who contributes. If you use this system, you very likely are an IT person to some extent, and you might just contribute a bit, because are we still doing 20 users for Ubuntu community member instead of 5? So here you go.
I think it's 50. I think it's even more than that.
But just say, participate, which we love and welcome anyway. Learn to make the thing better that you use, and for that, get a few more. Still private use, but fine at this scale.
So I think as a last part of this webinar, I would like to cover some of the features of Ubuntu Pro. So if you decide to get Ubuntu Pro subscription, what are you actually getting? Because you're getting more than just buying more time to get your decision about your 2004 workloads. And just one more comment on the legacy support that we mentioned. We are still providing legacy support, and security maintenance for 1404. So 1404 is the release that, as you can imagine, was launched in 2014. So I definitely wasn't here when it was launched. It's quite a while ago. And I think it's crazy exciting to think about the fact that we are still continuing to maintain and support, software that is that much old, 11 years old, and we'll continue doing that for additional, more than 1 year from now, at least.
Yep.
We have a lot of enterprise users that are still using 1404. They don't want to migrate, and we are carefully backporting all the security updates from newer versions of all the sort of applications and dependencies and so on back to the version over that was shipped over 10 years ago, which I find quite incredible.
It is, and gladly, there's a balance. It gets harder the further you backport, but gladly over time, at least some of the issues are only present in new features added later. Even the crap got added after Trusty, which is 1404, and then so it's a weird balance. It's still quite intense and quite some work. But yeah, and I mentioned before reading release notes of all releases in between. If somebody goes Trusty to Noble then, or Trusty to whatever 2026 will bring,
Jump.
you'll have a book to read. So maybe just start from scratch mentally. But yeah, absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I think it's really very exciting, and I was shocked to see how many of enterprise users really care about this long-term stability, and it really is a benefit to customers when they can just continue using their current software stack as is for an extended periods of time. This is also when you consider the cost of hardware and many other aspects of your fully production workload that is running today. So all the complexity again kind of taken by us behind the scenes, and what you see is that the same workloads that you have just continue working for years and years, which is quite amazing. Covering other aspects of Ubuntu Pro, so extra time is definitely one of the aspects, but also the breadth of the open source security updates. You mentioned that for the universe, we have Ubuntu community updates. So there are a lot of updates that are done by community, but there was never before Ubuntu Pro was launched, a commitment from Canonical, an enterprise level commitment from Canonical to actually do security maintenance for all of that. And I think it's quite interesting that using the same tools and methodology and frameworks, we're able to provide the same level of service. So doing security maintenance for not just Ubuntu, the operating system, but also all the applications and all the different packages that come with Ubuntu repositories for the same extended period of time with the same focus on critical and high CVEs.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of applications, that's the thing. I mean, there are even applications from Ubuntu, or sometimes in snaps, but snaps can be built from dApps, can be built from sources. There's also support there in various ways. But yeah, at the end of the day, the one thing I'm most concerned, and that is why I was not too comfortable with the third-party thing, make sure you don't have a bad third-party software installed. If you have to install a third-party, make sure it's something that is also working and supported all the time. Because while my personal and my team's mission is to provide a reliable platform, that's one of the centerpiece frames, like words in our mission, is the platform is only worth so much if the primary workload on it is also kept updated and kept secure.
Right.
So yeah.
So Ubuntu is really your partner for many open source projects that you can find in Ubuntu repositories. So pretty much almost anything you can imagine, you can find in the Ubuntu repositories, and you can consume it from there. All of it comes with the same level of service. So the same end of life dates, the same security maintenance. It's all supported by Canonical. It all has been tested together. So there's a lot of benefits from kind of consuming all the open source you can get from Ubuntu. But of course, if you get any additional things, then you have to consider, who is your vendor, who's your provider, how they do security maintenance, who will support me if something goes wrong.
It's absolutely fine to have. I just wanted to bring it up for consideration.
Right.
Yeah, that you have everything. Yeah, and then from there, it's just what solution do you need? because that's at the end of the day why you run Ubuntu, to solve some problem for you. If you're a developer that just needs a desktop that is quick and does the things, fine. And yes, you get all the editors and languages always updated, or a provider of some service. It's fine. It's your choice what you want to do with it.
Mm. And at the very beginning of this webinar, you already mentioned kernel life patch. I can see that you're a fan of kernel life patch, so you don't have to reboot your machine. But I think that many of the Ubuntu users, they don't know exactly how it works. So I think it's quite interesting that you can apply all of these patches that are then sitting in the memory, and then you don't have to reboot. So I'm always fascinating to kind of imagine how this thing works in practice.
Yeah, well, I think it's more fascinating to understanding what you can and what you cannot fix, because there are elements which change. Essentially, I would try to simplify. Essentially, the data that is flowing is hard to change because that's just not able. But yeah, code and flow fixes, that is really, really awesome. And that is also why it's worth, even if you're as silly as me and just don't reboot as long as you can, you might every now and then look at, known CVEs if there's something, depending on your level of uncertainty, check what live patch has applied. There's canonical live patch status, and you see what is applied and what isn't. And if you got scared by some news and canonical says there's a kernel patch available, and you say, I'm fine, I have live patch, which is in 90+% really the thing. Still have a look if you aren't sure to do so.
And if you have a large environment of many Ubuntu instances, and if you're concerned about, deploying patches, whether it's for kernel or for the, deps in Ubuntu repositories, I think Landscape, which also comes with Ubuntu Pro, is a really good systems management that helps you to have a single pane of glass where you can see all of the instances and you can manage them directly there.
Yeah, it is indeed a helpful thing to manage systems at scale, depending on the level of scale. For 2 systems, not worth it. For 1 million systems, you probably have your thing. But in between, there are plenty of numbers, which can be quite helpful.
And the other things that come with Ubuntu Pro, I think all the, hardening and compliance, you mentioned FIPS, but there is also the Ubuntu hardening guide that is based on CIS that allows you to both apply hardening rules and also then audit that this thing has been applied properly. So if you have your auditor coming and they ask you, have you already applied all of these rules and is it still true? You can just generate a report every month or every quarter or however
and based on that,
often you need it.
Yeah, and based on that, I think it's just worth to spell out the 10 seconds of information about. Sometimes I heard people raise, well, if you have Ubuntu and it's meant to be good by default, why is there a hardening guide making it more secure? Why can't you be secure to begin with? And I think that's a topic that is often misunderstood because there are 2 major reasons. One is some things lock down a system so that if it would come by default in that much of a lockdown state, you would install and then you would have a brick because you can't log in any way. So it's not going to work, especially if you're deploying remote. And more importantly, some of those regulations are, in fact, regulations. They might be introduced by law and standards that are given to you. And those standards, usually, they're good. They're much better than not thinking about it. But they're usually evolving slower than the most modern. So depending on your character, you might realize that, for example, FIPS, great example, helps you to be compliant to so many things and making it better than doing nothing. But at the same time, it disables and enables some encryption, which you say, you know what, if it's 2025 now, I would actually prefer to have the newer one. And that will come. There will be regular versions. FIPS comes with version 2, 3, and so on. And that will evolve. But that is the answer, I would say. Why can't it be that by default? FIPS will improve it for many, but not for all, and make it worse for some, so it shouldn't be the default. A perfect lockdown of a system, you don't want that right after deployment, because then you will be locked out. It's good if all your attackers are locked out, but not for that. And we regularly discuss and think about what can we do by default for everybody, the various providers, usage in a cloud, on a system, on a desktop. What can we do for everybody? And we make these, selection of encryption methods, how logins are set up, how disks are set up. We do that. And whenever there is something that can work for the general user, which is a superset of so many user types you can think of, then you know what? Then you don't need FIPS or hardening or nothing, because then it's just the normal thing.
Right. So just to quickly summarize before we close this webinar, and we can also answer some questions at the end. So if you have questions, please raise them to us. What we covered today is the fact that, Ubuntu 20.04 is going out of standard support soon, and it's important to take actions. You have a couple of actions to consider. One of the actions is to be migrating to the newer LTS. You can do it by just getting your current 20.04 to 22.04 with a simple command, but you have to do your homework and check if it's the right solution for you. What Christian covered is also the fact that you can redeploy, and it's perfectly fine. Or you can get a subscription, Ubuntu Pro subscription, which gets you many, many other features, including the fact that you get more time. So you can get additional 5 years of security maintenance for your Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, and even more security updates, because we'll then cover also the universe, and you'll get access to kernel life patches and so on. And even that can be extended to a further 2 years, giving you 12 years in total if you get a legacy support add-on on top of that. All the options are good options, so you can consider the right option for you. And one thing that we would like you not to do is to use Ubuntu 20.04 as is after its end of standard security updates, because you will not be receiving any security update, and it's not a good thing for you to be doing.
Yeah. I do not want to see the press release of this important company got hacked because outdated OS. It was Ubuntu. No, the solution is all there. I don't want to see that.
That's true. So we made all of this effort to make sure that it's easy to migrate to a newer LTS. It's easy to deploy a new LTS release, and you also get a subscription that is free for personal users and paid for enterprises. So just pick your choice. Yeah. And we love you to be continuing to be a happy user of Ubuntu.
Yeah. So often in life, you just don't have the choice. Here you have a choice. Sorry. Now everybody has to think about it. It's just the way it goes, isn't it?
Okay. That was brilliant, Christian. Thank you very much.
Be my guest. Always.